This video is sponsored by Brush Galaxy. How would you feel if you could draw this too? Maybe create your own personalized Christmas cards? Well, I'm going to break it down into steps that are way easier to follow than you might imagine, so that you can have a go and amaze yourself. Okay, so as explained in the intro, I'm going to break this down into steps so that you learn not only the painting techniques, but also about the app that I'm using, PROCREATE. But that isn't to say that you can't use a different app on a different tablet and still follow along. Having said that, within the app PROCREATE, I'm using their default A4 canvas, which is 297 by 210 millimeters at 300 dpi. And also in terms of the color profile, I'm using the sRGB, and it's the code that ends in 2.1. Again, it comes as default within PROCREATE on the list. In terms of the brushes, I'm going to be using within airbrushing the soft brush, within sketching, the artist crayon, within drawing, the Oberon brush, which I have amended and I'll explain that later on. Within calligraphy, I'm going to use the monoline, and within Luminance, I'm going to use the light pen and also the bokeh lights. In terms of the colors, I've already pre-selected a color palette. There aren't too many colors. Each of these colors is down in the video description as a hexadecimal code. So you go to the value section, type the codes one at a time that I've provided down in the description here, press enter, the color appears up here and you can piece it together yourself. Or next to the codes is a link that takes you to my Patreon page and you can download the color file for free to save you some time. And of course, Patreon is the place where you can support this channel, as well as gain access to exclusive content, extended versions of these tutorials, and other things. I'd like to say a massive thank you to those people who are currently supporting me or who have in the past. It does genuinely make a massive difference to my ability to keep motivated and keep these videos coming. So thank you so much for your support. It's hugely appreciated. And with all of that said and done, let's get started. So I've got my A4 canvas open. I'm just going to rotate it into a portrait mode. I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to go to the first color on the top row. And I'm going to drag from the little circle into the canvas area and flood fill the whole canvas. I'm going to go to my layers and I'm going to create a new layer, layer 2. And then I'm going to change the little n by tapping in it. It stands for normal in the blend modes. I'm going to go down to add, and you notice it changes to a little a. I'm going to go to our brushes. I'm going to go to the bokeh lights, and I'm going to reset it. And I'm going to stay on that first color. So again, on the bokeh lights, I'm going to use the first color still on the top row. I'm going to put the size at about 40% and 100% opacity, and then up the center, I'll do just a few passes of this. Let it build up a little bit, like so. I want it to be a bit darker and a bit thinner at the edges. Then I'm going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to blur it in probably to about the 30%. Now I might just desaturate it a little bit. So I'll go back to the adjustments, the hue, saturation and brightness, and the saturation. By default it's at 50. I'm just going to turn it down to about 40. Then I'm going to go back to my layers and create a new layer, layer 3. Again, change the N by tapping in it, scrolling down to the add. I'm going to stay on the bokeh lights, but this time I'm going to amend the brush. So I'll tap on it. I'm going to go to the spacing. I'm going to put the spacing at about 70%, 70. And I'm going to go to the color dynamics and turn the hue down to none. That doesn't mean it has no color, it just means it won't change too dramatically from one color to another. I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to use the second color on the top row. I'm not going to change the brush settings at all. I'm going to do a few creeping in along the edges initially. Then I'm going to go to the adjustments, motion blur. I'm going to blur that to the side to about 30%. And then I'm going to go to that layer, tap on the A and just scroll, slide the opacity of it down quite significantly to about 30%. And I'm going to go back to my layers and create a new layer, layer 4. And again, I'm going to change the blend mode from normal to add. Don't need to change the brush settings. I'm just going to start tapping in just a few of these in the mix. And then I'm going to go to the adjustments, motion blur again, and just a bit more subtly this time to about 20%, just to blur them in a bit. I do think I will also desaturate it a little bit. Go back to the adjustments, hue, saturation and brightness, and just dial back the warmth of that to about the 35%. And then I'm going to go to the layer and slide and duplicate it. Now some of it will make quite a lot stronger. Some of it I want to keep, but some of it I'll want to subdue as well. So I can go in with the eraser, set to the soft brush, maybe 10% size, 60% opacity, and I don't want anything too central because this is where the bauble is going to be. Maybe just select some of the ones that you want to be more prominent. Okay, for some of it to be really bright and vibrant, but I don't need every part of it to be equally vibrant. And that will do. Now with this top layer, I'm going to slide and duplicate it again, but this time I'm going to go to the transform, the flip horizontally and flip vertically, deselect, then back to the adjustments, Gaussian blur this time, and just blur it a little bit more in, knock it back somewhat, like so. So go back to our layers, create a new layer. Keep the blend mode on normal this time, but we're going to go back to our brushes, calligraphy, monoline. Go back to my colors. I'm going to use the third color on the top row. And I'm going to do my best to draw a circle. It doesn't have to be neat, just as long as it closes up. Then you go to the top. You should have a little arrow appear. If it hasn't created this little option to change it to a circle, retry it. Try to get a little bit closer to a circle. Click circle, tap out of it, and there's your circle. So then we can drag the color into the center to flood fill, like that. Next, I'm going to go to the adjustments, liquify, put it on the push, put it to about 45% size, 70% pressure, and then from the top, just nudge it up a little bit. We just want to create a slight imperfection to the circle, so we've got something to attach the string to. Doesn't need to be very much. Deselect, go to the layer, tap on it, put on the alpha lock, go back to our colors. We'll go for the fourth color, and we'll go back to the airbrushing, soft brush, 15% size, maybe 20% opacity, and we can just bring in some different hues, different colors around the edge. We just want to increase the sense of roundness. Maybe go for the fifth color, maybe turn it down a touch more, 10%. Bring a nice glow in around that bottom edge. And even just that subtle change just makes it look a little bit more spherical. Go back to our colors. We'll go for the sixth color again. We do need to turn the opacity down because it is going to be quite stark a difference. We're just going to add it up into the top area. Still at 10% size. Just want to catch the light coming down from this direction. We'll put this part. Tap it in there a few times. Then I'm going to turn it down, 4% size, and we can just carefully guide it round, maybe even smaller. In fact, 4% is a little bit large still, 2%. And we have the alpha lock on, so it's not going to add anything here. We can only add it onto the inside of our shape. Let's just tease it around that corner a little bit, down here as well. Again, this is all helping that spherical shape. Back up again, 5%. Yeah, just reinforce that in that upper area a little bit more. So we're using default brushes in this tutorial, but if you'd like to bring your art to the next level, you could try premium brushes from Brush Galaxy. Brush Galaxy enables you to unlock over 50,000 premium Procreate brushes for a fraction of the price, and you can access over 20 different categories such as fur, lettering, nature, animals, and many others. So for example, a quick search of snow and the results give you tons of different winter and snow brushes, which could be really useful for adding that extra something to your artwork. Start now and get the first 7 days for free and join thousands of other artists using Brush Galaxy tools to bring their art to the next level. The link is in the comments and in the description. We'll go to that layer and turn off the alpha lock. Then we'll go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur. We'll blur it in just a little bit, because whenever you get a kind of close-up of a sphere, you're going to get the front bit in focus, but maybe just on the edges, you're going to get a slight blurring off. the depth of field might not be quite deep enough to catch everything in super sharp focus. So it's more realistic to just soften it a little bit. 3% looks about right. Deselect. Now we're going to add a snowflake to it before we add anything else. So I'm going to go to my layers and create a new layer. Then I'm going to go to the wrench symbol. I'm going to go to the drawing guide. Now the drawing guide by default puts you on a grid. We want to change that. If you've just watched my more recent tutorial, I've shown you how to do a snowflake already. We're going to do this as a fairly simple one. If you do want to check out a more realistic snowflake tutorial, then please check out my last tutorial as well. Go down here to edit drawing guide. Then we can go to symmetry, and you can see it's given us one line of symmetry there. Tap on the options and we can put it onto quadrant, which gives us a line of symmetry on both the horizontal and the vertical. Click done. Zoom in a little bit. I suppose we could go to the bauble and we could go to the transform, and we could just do our best initially just to put it more central like that. Doesn't need to be, but it helps when we initially draw the snowflake. Go back up to the top layer, and we're going to go to our brushes, and we're going to go to the drawing Oberon brush. Now I have reset it, or rather I have amended it, so I'll reset it. Tap on it again, and it's just the spacing that I've changed from 5% put it up to 50%, and it just creates some broken texture, which is really quite useful. We'll go to the 7th color on the top row, brush size just up into the 2%, maybe a little bit higher. There is still a range even within each percentage, so not quite 3, just down into 2. That looks about right. It is as well pressure sensitive, so put it to 100% opacity, zoom in, and we'll start near the top, and we'll just create some branches, some points that stick out perhaps on our snowflake. Create a variety of lines perhaps. Something like this. Then we can go to that layer, slide and duplicate it. I'll just zoom out a little bit. Then we go to the transform, and rather than using any of the horizontal flips or the vertical or even the rotate 45 degrees, we'll go on the little green circle, rotate it round. Now it depends, for some reason the degrees it tells you, I'm not quite sure why, but it's either on the 60 or the 30. Now when I did my snowflake one, I rotated it to 60 and that was accurate, but for some reason it says 30 when I put it in the right place. So 30 degrees or 60 degrees, it will take you to roughly this position. You should be able to judge whether it's accurate or not. Then I can go back to this layer, slide and duplicate it, transform, and this time I can just flip it horizontally. And there's our snowflake design. Now you might not like yours, you might want to do something different, it's up to you. I'm going to pinch those 3 layers together. Bit tricky to do. If you persist, it is possible. There you go. We still got the drawing assist on, so I'm going to go back to my brush, and perhaps I'm just going to create the branches, connect these up. So one for there, and that's enough. It creates all of them. I'm quite pleased with that. Then you can always go and tweak the design. I'm just going to extend some of these, maybe add a kind of diamond shape on the end. And then I'd have to do the same for these ones, obviously. And maybe I can just add some modifications in the center there. Go to the layer, tap on it, turn off the drawing assist, then go to the transform, put it on uniform and pinch it in. Put it in the center initially, but then move it down into slightly this lower area, pinch it a bit more and a bit more. So I want it slightly offset, kind of there-ish, looks about right to me. Go to the adjustments, liquify, push, 50% size, 50% pressure, and just at the center, nudge it that way. We have a straight line here on a sphere that doesn't make a lot of sense, so it needs to be curved round. Maybe even just push it from the edges, curve it round a bit. Wherever you feel that it just makes sense to curve it. Don't want to overdo it, but just a hint of that wrapping around a sphere. Go to that layer and duplicate it perhaps. And on that top version, I'm going to go to the transform, maybe pinch it so it's smaller, move it somewhere else. I could even rotate it, put it into a different area perhaps somewhere up here. Could be quite nice. Duplicate it, transform, maybe move, like say, another section over here, maybe even reduce it in scale more, somewhere up here perhaps. Then we can go to the eraser, set to the soft brush, put it at a controllable size, so maybe 3% size, 100% opacity, and maybe should pinch them first, make it easier. Just carefully erase the bits that we don't need anymore. Pinch them all together. So now all of the snowflakes are on one layer. I might just slide and duplicate it to thicken them up, slide and duplicate it to thicken them up again. Again, pinch them together. Just made them a bit more present. Then I'm going to tap on it, put on the alpha lock, go to my brushes, I'm going to go to the sketching, artist crayon, and I'm going to go for something quite pale, like this 6th color, which is like a nice blue, 3% size, 30% opacity, and we can just go in there and add like a frosting in places, just so it reduces them a little bit. Just adds another element to that, not too much perhaps, but yeah, just adds another texture in there, I think, that works quite nicely. So we're going to go back to the bauble layer, create a new layer above that, tap on the end, change the blend mode from normal to add. I'm also going to tap on it and put on the clipping mask, which means that anything we add to this new layer will be restricted to the confines of the layer below it, the actual bauble. I'm going to use, I'll go to the airbrushing soft brush, 10% size, 10% opacity, and this 5th color. And I'm just going to go behind the bauble initially, add some luminance into the bauble, or behind the snowflake rather. Really create some nice luminance in the center there. I think that's going to just bring it out a bit more, which I think is nice. Perhaps I'll turn it down to 3%, and then I can extend some of that around here as well. Just touch that in, maybe put it down to an even lower opacity, 3%, 5% size, and just soften that in, blend it in a little bit more. So we're getting reflected light and we're getting internal light that's just catching on that edge too. I think it all adds up and creates a nice effect. Perhaps we will go back to the blue color, the 6th color, and perhaps we could just exaggerate that even further at the top corner. Not that there is a corner, but within the top area. Again, just extend that around a little bit on either side. It looks quite nice. Now we're starting to get a translucency kind of effect, which is really good. Perhaps I could also go back to layer 7, go in with the soft brush with an airbrushing, and I quite like this 4th color on the bottom row. 4% size, 10% opacity, zoom in, and there is that kind of like a dark area, not on the very edge, but just a little bit back from that, and I'm just going to bring it around here and up here as well, maybe just around here a little bit. So I want to preserve that highlight there, I want to preserve the highlight in the center. I'm just adding a little bit of a contrast kind of color here that I think just adds something quite nice to the overall shape. I think it just brings out the luminance of those other contrasting areas better. Okay, I'm happier with that now. So we're going to go back to layer 9 and create a new layer on top of that. Again, we'll probably change the blend mode from normal to add again. Go back to our brushes, luminance, light pen, and we'll go for the 5th color on the top. In fact, on this new layer, we probably should tap on it and put on the clipping mask too. So anything we add to this layer now is going to stop at the edges of the bulb. It will not go beyond it. I'm going to use it at 30% size and 30% opacity. And yeah, I can go right up to the edge if I need to, but we don't have to. And when I'm adding these circles, rather than just doing a circle like I might add there, when I get to the edges, it's obviously on the surface of a sphere, so it might start to become more of an ellipse. Just a subtle shift in the way that you might approach the shape, I think will make a difference to it. Now you don't have to do too many of these to create a nice effect, but we're certainly going to have a little bit of a clustering of them towards the center of the snowflake. You can start to see the nice touch, the effect that it's bringing to it. Perhaps with this we can go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and we just blur that in, subdue them somewhat, maybe 5%, deselect, and then again we can go in there and just add some sharper ones now as well in the mix. I'm going to go and create a new layer, and this time I'm going to put it on top of the snowflake. Again, change the blend mode from normal to add. Everything else I'm going to keep the same that I had before, and I'm just going to add some of these on top of the snowflake now, just to in part start to obscure some of it, just so it really submerges it, surrounds it in a glow. Otherwise it just doesn't capture that quality well enough. Like that. At this point, really, that guide that we had on before needs to disappear. So go to the wrench, turn off that drawing guide, a little bit of a distraction. Perhaps we could even go back to the airbrushing, soft brush, put it to 10% size, 5% opacity, and just add some of that into the center area there. Not too much of that, we don't want to lose the snowflake. It's quite easy to get carried away. Now we've got two layers of the little lights for the light bulb, or not the light bulb, the bauble. Now you might feel you've gone too far in some respects. What I'm going to do for the top layer, tap on the A and just scroll it down. So there's none of it and all of it. So I'm going to put it down to about 70%. So it's still there, but it's not quite as potent. Then I'm going to go back to layer 10 with the eraser, soft brush, 2% size, 100% opacity. And maybe I could just go in there and just thin out some of these. We don't need as many after all. I think a slightly fewer number of these will actually go further. You decide what the right balance for yours is. I just don't want there to be too much. I think I would like a little bit hint more luminance on here, so I am going to go back to layer 9. I'm going to go for the 8th color on the top row with the soft brush with an airbrushing, 2% size, 20% opacity strength, and I'm just going to bring in a hint more of this around the edge. Just a hint more of it around there. I like the difference it makes. It's subtler, but I like it. I'm going to go to the snowflake. I'm going to tap on it, turn off the alpha lock. I'm going to zoom in, and it's a little bit awkward the way it just ends at the edge there. So perhaps I ought to go in with maybe the soft brush still. Scroll it down to 1%, 20% opacity. And maybe I could just create the sense that, you know, some of these designs or bits of the snowflake design actually have depth to them, just by increasing the bumps at the edges. Just a hint, maybe that's a little bit vibrant, may go back one again. So it's the 7th color. I can use that in the mix. And just make the leather actually on the surface there a little bit better. Put back on the alpha lock on the snowflake, and I do feel like I've just lost some of this, so I'm going to go back over the bits that just need to come back out a little bit more, make more of a feature of them again, just with this color. If we added a little frosting a little bit too enthusiastically, then we can just go and bring the snowflake back if it's needed. Okay, we're going to go to the top layer, create a new layer on top, layer 12. So we'll go to the first color with the soft brush, 1% size, 50% strength, opacity. And basically the shape I'm going for is roughly this kind of a shape, but we're going to have little bits that are cut out of it that are going to be like little prongs. I mean, that's only a rough version of it, but you get the idea. So the first thing we're going to do is just create that curve at the top. Don't want it too wide or too big. Comes to something of a point, and we're going to bring it down so that it touches just long enough for it to touch the bauble, just to rest on it. Create a little leg, have it creeping back up, across, back down again, touch it, up, across, back down. There you go. And it really doesn't need to be overly complicated. It's a smaller detail on it, and you know, maybe even that I've done quite big really. So once I've colored it in, I might reduce it in size just to make it a smaller element than it is currently. So I'll go to the transform, put it on uniform, pinch it in, reposition it, pinch it in a bit more, like so. Zoom in again, still the same brushes, second colour, and I'm just going to add some variations along here. So it's perhaps a metal that is just bouncing light around a bit differently. Go to the third colour, maybe just add some warmth in the mix. Go for the fifth colour, maybe we can add some of that onto the very top. It is facing up, so it's more likely to catch the light. I suppose that edges too, really. It's a small element, and it honestly, I don't feel inclined to get too bogged down in it. And then we've got the lightest colour, which is the sixth colour. I'm going to turn it down even further on the 1%. Just give it a crispness along that edge, and up there too. Sharpen it up along that edge, and you can zoom out. And honestly, just even a very rough version like that isn't particularly in need of being complicated. If you want to sharpen it up again, you can just go around, just sharpen up those little shapes if you want to. But I suppose we should have a little bit of a shadow, so we can go to perhaps the first colour, turn the opacity down to 20%, keep it at 1%, and a little bit of a shadow where it makes contact, and then maybe go for the third colour, extend the shadow down and across, skip over the little light, maybe put it up to 2%, extend that shadow across a little bit, just grounds it a little bit on the bauble, gives it a sense that, okay, if it's casting a shadow, it really is there, something like that. Back to the first colour, we're going to do a little ring, so I'm going to put it down to the 1% again, 100% opacity this time, just create a little curve, hold it, should snap to a better shape, and there you go, pretty easy. Go to a lighter colour, perhaps I ought really to put on the alpha lock by tapping on the layer, putting on the alpha lock, and with this lighter colour, down to 1% and 40% opacity, I can just go around the edge, have it glisten, catch the light a little bit, and also on this side too, and it just gives it a hint more realism. Tap on the layer, turn off the alpha lock, go back in with a soft brush, go to the fourth colour, 2% size, 20% opacity, and well, just going to create a little bit of a sense of a fabric coming up here as well, just like the string. So we'll faintly get that in there, creating almost like a V shape. Then I'm going to go to the third colour, 1% size, 50% opacity, and then I can just sharpen up one of the edges a little bit, make it darker. Have another line that just collides with it a little bit, and then another line that runs up here, and then another line there. I mean, it doesn't really have to be spelt out. It could be like a translucent kind of silk-like material, ribbon. Doesn't need an awful lot of definition as such. Sometimes just a hint of things is plenty. Go to the fourth colour, just if it needs a little bit of a lighter colour up here again. Maybe the second colour, 1% size at the very bottom edge of it, and we can just introduce a highlight up there if we need it. I'm perhaps going to go to that whole layer, go to the adjustments, go to the hue, saturation and brightness, and just darken it up somewhat. Take it, I mean, really a subtle amount goes a long way. So maybe put it to 45%. It just gives it more of a presence. And there you go. We're going to go back to layer 2 with the soft brush within airbrushing. I'm going to use the fifth colour on the bottom row, 30% size, and well, 5% opacity. And I'm just going to bring more of the brightness into this top corner. I think that it will just make sense of the light in this area a little bit better. Like so. Might even go to the top layer and create a new layer, layer 13. Change the blend mode from normal to add. Stay with this colour. I'm going to turn the soft brush down to 2% size, or 1% size actually, and 20% strength opacity. Maybe just give a little metal layer just to glisten, and that bit there too, and the leading edge just ties it into the whole thing better. And I could even go around the edge. I mean, I've not got any kind of mask on here, it doesn't matter. Just be careful, we can go around and add that, have it interact with the kind of snowflake that's on top, so it gives that 3D feel have it just go around the edge of this one too. Just increase the sense that it's something that's sticking out. Maybe even go on some of the edges of this snowflake, just on the leading edges, so it just, catching the light a little bit more. Gives the sense that maybe it's just a hint more 3D than perhaps we'd created. One last touch, I'm going to go back to layer 2, create a layer above it, so layer 14. I'm going to change the blend mode from normal to add. I'm going to go back to the amended version of the bokeh lights that we used before. I'm going to use the first color on the top row again. I'm going to put it up to maybe 45% size, 100% opacity. And I kind of feel like it needs some of that cooler bokeh lights coming in through this area a little bit more. Again, to the adjustments, motion blur, blur them in, maybe 30%, add a couple more in the mix, why not? And again, I'm going to go back to the hue, saturation and brightness. I'm just going to turn the saturation down to 40. And I'm actually going to change the hue. I'm going to make it slightly more green. I'm going to turn that down to 40 as well. Okay, I'm going to leave this tutorial here at this point. I hope you've enjoyed following along. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't done already. I produce a video every Sunday, so please check out the next one next Sunday. Leave me a comment, it really helps out the channel. Give me a suggestion of what you want to see next perhaps. And I shall see you back here next week. Merry Christmas.